Hey everyone, and welcome back to our podcast on our mental health series that we're doing in October. I'm here with our two mental health professionals, Sarah and Miranda. They are from, I want to say it right, the Indian Springs Counseling and Wellness.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank y'all for joining us again, week 2.
We're so happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And this week we're talking about anger. And in the Inside Out series, one of my favorite comedians plays the voice. And when I think of anger, I think of Lewis Black.
Oh.
I mean, how perfect
It's so perfect.
is it? In that character, I laugh all the way through almost every one of that character's lines. But as we think about anger, where does that come from? What kind of response is anger?
So anger is one of my I know it gets a bad rap, but it's one of my favorite emotions. It's a protective emotion. So it's kind of a signal of someone's crossing your boundary and they shouldn't be.
Okay.
And it gets a really bad rap, but I think it's really important.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that you made me think of is when I get the most angry, it would be if somebody's done something to one of my kids.
Yes.
You know, that's when I get angry.
Mm-hmm.
That protection comes out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think you're right. You know, there's some scripture that talks about how anger is, don't let the sun go down on your anger, right? Which I don't know if I've not been able to practice that all the time, but it implies that anger's not bad.
Yeah.
That there's a place for it. So when is there a place for anger?
Yeah, we talk about in therapy, in the therapy world, that emotions aren't, don't let me butcher this, emotions aren't good or bad, they just are.
Yeah, they're signals. They give us an idea of what's happening in our own body and around us. And so I think that looking at it just as a sign and a reason that something's happening that needs to be tweaked and adjusted is really important.
Yeah, or that something that is important to me has been compromised, my values, or for me, when I get angry, a lot of the times it is that protective piece, but also like the sense of justice that I have within me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like certain things are right or wrong, and even when someone else does something wrong that may not even have anything to do with me, I get really angry.
Yeah.
That sense of justice within me, which I think God made us to be that way, to have that internal sense of justice and what's right and wrong and fighting for that. And,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because you saw Jesus doing that when he was flipping the tables in the temple, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was definitely anger.
Yeah.
But it was anger at something that he was offended by in a deep way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but
he was protecting something he valued.
Right. But today I'll get angry at the guy who's going slow in front of me on 280. What's that about?
Yeah.
I think that sometimes there's some nuances. Like we have sometimes in therapy, and I don't typically pull it out very often, but it's like an emotion wheel. And you can start with like the basic emotions and kind of go out and get more specific. So when you get mad at the guy going slow in front of you, it could be a protective factor of you're not wanting to get in trouble for being late, or you're going to be, you know, there's a lot of reasons around it. That might be kind of like frustration, but anger is a secondary emotion. So we want to look at like what's underneath it. So you're on the right track. Like you definitely want to kind of dig in and be like, okay, what is that about? And kind of get curious.
Okay. So that kind of leads me, what's going on in our bodies when we feel anger?
I know what's going on in my body when I'm angry.
Tell us.
My heart is racing. My muscles get tense. Like it's almost like a fight or flight response for me sometimes. Because with that needing to protect is also the perception of threat, kind of like what we talked about with anxiety. And I think anxiety and anger and fear, all of these, fear sometimes is that primary emotion underneath the anger. So there's that threat aspect. So for me, when I'm angry, I go into fight lot.
It activates our stress hormones. So blood actually flows to our hands and feet when we're angry, because you're ready to kind of fight. Like your body's getting ready for that. And so you're kind of disconnected from your logical thought, and you kind of go into that fight or flight response. So it's a big feeling. It's hard to control anger. I think that's why it gets a bad rap sometimes, is because we're looking at unregulated anger, because it's a real tricky one.
And also why, if you're in any kind of relationship, but especially like married or partnered, like how fights, like you get in a fight with your partner and then you're like, all of a sudden you're like, what are we even talking about? Because the anger unchecked, it gets illogical, because that part of your brain that makes sense of things isn't even online. And so then you're just throwing daggers.
Yeah.
And I can even have an experience where when I'm saying things in my brain, I'm going, you need to stop talking. You need to stop talking. But I can't stop talking.
Yes. There is an expert that talks about how our emotions love themselves, and they want to have you behave in ways that bring out more of that emotion. So when you're angry, you want to stomp your feet and slam the door and clear the table, because that's what feels good to your body. But that's what we work on in therapy a lot, is kind of setting up, one, understanding what's behind the anger, but also figuring out how to regulate it so you're able to notice early and maybe stop talking when you want to, instead of just hearing that in your head and continuing to go.
Right, before anger just explodes.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that kind of moves us to looking at some practical ways in which we can deal with our anger. So in the moment of anger, what are some of those things that we can do to kind of pump the brakes?
Yeah. I like a lot of somatic stuff, which is basically just like working on your body. So sour candy can help, like when you're in either a panic attack or a fit of rage. And that's a fun one. Everybody loves a Sour Patch Kid, or most people do. But it kind of helps bring your body back into logical thought. I really think hard about this just because there's not a lot that feels big enough to deal with anger. I like music, because music can really shift a mood. So having playlists, I think having things prepared before you're feeling really angry, kind of all in one place. I call it like your distress tolerance kit.
I love that. A anger playlist, we're not going to take it, would be on my list.
Yes.
That's not what you're talking about, or that is what you're talking about?
I mean, there are like rage rooms and things. Like I think there's a place for that, like where you do need to express that energy. But I also think that just having things that calm you down and soothe you, and maybe listening to We're Not Going to Take It does calm you down. And after, actually singing can help stimulate your vagus nerve, which is the calm down response. So it's not a bad plan.
Not a bad plan.
Yeah.
For me, I want my anger to be seen and heard.
Yes.
So sometimes when I'm mad about whatever, even just having someone, whether it's Michael or, you, anyone, just for me to say, hey, this happened today, and it made me so mad. And that person to be like, oh yeah, that sounds whatever. And then I'm like, okay, I feel better. Like just having, being able to express it and then it be seen and heard and honored makes me feel better in the moment. So just talking about it.
I think
that's simple, but
yes, I think that's huge. And not having them judge it, but just really fully listen and kind of like let you vent. It's so helpful to kind of move through it.
I didn't have this down to ask, but your response made me think of something. Like if my spouse is angry and she's talking to me about it, I'm a 2 on the Enneagram. So my first response is, well, you know what? If we do this, that could help. But that's not what she needs, I don't think, at that moment.
Sounds like you know that from experience.
Yes.
Like maybe she's let you know.
Yeah. So someone who's with someone who's angry, how can they help with the anger?
Yeah. I think that's really big and important. And I think like we talk a lot about like validating like listening skills and like active listening. I think really listening without judgment and hearing them is big. There's not a person on the earth that doesn't feel better when they feel seen and heard and understood. And it just really calms our body down. Just like naming the emotion, having someone reflect back to us our experience and say, that makes sense. Like, you're making sense. I understand why you're feeling angry. That just has this natural calming effect.
So in the first place, listening for understanding.
Yes.
Reflecting back what you heard. You're saying that this happened at work and it made you really mad.
Yeah.
And then validating. So summarizing, reflecting, and then validating. Even if you don't agree with someone, you can still validate the emotion. You're feeling this, and that makes sense.
Yeah. You can say, hey, I can understand why that made you mad.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, thank y'all so much for talking to us again about anger. And before we go, I almost forgot. Is there any like thing that you would say, hey, if this is happening, you probably need to reach out to somebody?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there is, we may have said this before, but there's not a bad time to reach out. I think that we definitely want mental health care to feel more accessible and not wait until people are in crisis. I think preventative measures are important, especially with anger, because it can get dangerous sometimes. You know, anger is that big emotion that sometimes has big consequences. And so I think when you feel yourself, for me, anger is a sign that I need to reflect and see what's getting me to that place. So am I needing more rest? Am I needing more support? You know, just kind of taking an inventory. When you notice yourself kind of flipping your lid and losing it on your loved ones or at work, I think it's important to sort of start to notice, like, where can I get the support that I need?
Yeah. I don't know if you're alluding to this or not, but if someone's taking their anger out on you in a way that is hurtful or harmful, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, anything like that, it's a different, I think, kind of help than maybe you're alluding to, but definitely reach out for help, because there's a healthy way to be angry and express that to people, and there's a harmful way to do it, and a lot of us can be harmful. And I don't mean just fights with your spouse, but in ways that might be physically abusive or anything like that. Always, if you can, reach out for help.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that.
Yeah.
That is extremely helpful. All right. Well, we will talk again next time for our next emotion, which I think is fear. Yeah, it's fear. It's right there.
Sounds good.
Yeah.